Okay, well, I think we're going to get going. It's 2 minutes after the hour and people can join in as they arrive. But welcome, everybody. It's lovely to see you. Welcome back for those that have been before, and welcome for the first time if this is your first time. My name is Tom Griffin. I'm an assistant professor at the Ted Rogers School of Hospitality and Tourism Management, and I'm also the assistant director of the Institute for Hospitality and Tourism Research. Today, we're going to be talking about building partnerships to help develop the visitor economy for the Main Street Reimagined project, looking at BIAs and Main Streets. Before we get going, I'm going to do our land acknowledgement relating to the land upon which Ryerson University, our ex-university, is built. Toronto is in the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. So just super quickly before we get going into today's topic, the Institute for Hospitality and Tourism Research is an institute connected to our school at the Hospitality and Tourism School. And really what we aim to do is to produce research that is of a scholarly quality, but has application to the real world and for our industry partners. And so as part of the Institute, this project, Main Street Reimagined, is something that myself and Natasha has been helping with, and also my colleague, Walter Jameson. And so if you haven't seen it before, we do have a website where we are releasing PDFs and sharing these video presentations on different topics relating to developing the visitor economy for the Main Street communities. And so, again, we are tourism people, and we're bringing our tourism experience and ideas to the Main Street. So we're not trying to overtake or take place of many of the other amazing initiatives that are going on, but really looking at how to develop the visitor economy to get those benefits. This is going to be our last session of the year. We are going to do a few more starting in January, so please sign up for the newsletter. I will drop that link in the chat in a little while once we get going. But thank you and welcome. So today we are going to be talking about partnerships and how BIAs especially can develop partnerships and some examples of partnerships that BIAs have developed to encourage and facilitate the visitor economy. We have 3 guest speakers today. And we are very fortunate. We have Natasha Francis is going to talk first with us. Natasha is a master's student who's been researching BIAs in the visitor economy. We then have David Pensato, who is the executive director of the Exchange District, BIZ, in Winnipeg. Welcome, David. And we also have Rebecca Scott from Stratford, Ontario, which is a great tourism destination, but looking at the work that they've done with the DMO and with the municipality to develop the visitor economy in their destination. As we go through, each speaker is going to talk for between 10 and 15 minutes. If you do have any immediate questions, please feel free to type into the chat or raise your hand and come off mute and ask them. But there will also be at least 20 to 30 minutes at the end of the session where we can have more of a discussion and delve into some of those ideas and topics if you want to ask the speakers some more detailed questions then. So thank you. So we're going to get going. So Natasha, how are you?
I'm good. How's everyone? Thanks for joining, everyone.
So Natasha, I thought, first of all, it would be great if you could just briefly explain what your research has been about and perhaps some of the things that you've done to conduct that research, just to give us that kind of base understanding of what's been going on.
Yeah, so last summer, Tom and Walter were kind enough to allow me to join in on their study on this. And I kind of used it as the topic for my master's thesis. So basically, over last summer, about a year ago, I talked to about 32 BIAs and similar organizations and did about hour-long semi-structured interviews with them and kind of just gathered information. And Rebecca and David were 2 of the people that were kind enough to answer my request. And so just kind of gathering information about kind of looking at the visitor economy as an option for Main Streets to look at kind of a long-term strategy to recovery. And so I just kind of over the last year took that information and wrote my thesis. And so this is just kind of one specific topic that came up in those interviews.
That's great. Thank you. And Natasha is defending in a week or so. So fingers crossed, Natasha. I think she's going to be okay.
Hope so.
Good. So tell us about partnerships, Natasha. First of all, what did you find about a broad overview of partnerships and the BIA community? What do you think BIAs can accomplish through partnerships? What have you found?
Yeah, so I think when I was reading about the topic, I think just broadly or generally speaking, the biggest overarching benefit of a partnership is just that it allows groups to kind of pool resources. And so kind of whatever resources that may be, whether it's money or expertise or labor, information, and just kind of address issues that are difficult for singular organizations to address on their own. And so I guess it's really just kind of about how can you take advantage of the strengths of individual groups and kind of bring those strengths together to create a larger impact. And so I guess one of the things that came up in the interviews was that Main Street specifically, when they're talking about the issues that they have when engaging visitors, it was kind of that obviously they have so many things on their plate and so many responsibilities, but only finite amount of time in the day and money to spend. And so kind of got me thinking about, well, maybe is collaboration a way to kind of get around that and to kind of pool resources together to kind of develop the broader destination, but then also kind of looking at that at the Main Street level. And so I guess one of the things that it kind of does is when different groups are working together, it kind of brings credibility to the work that you're doing and kind of greater attention, because obviously you've got more names on the project or more names on the advocacy efforts or things like that. And then I guess the last thing would be when I read about like visitor economy development, without getting too academic, something that comes up a lot is the idea of like a multi-stakeholder approach, and kind of the importance of trying to coordinate development efforts and just kind of ensuring that there's a sense of like cohesion and agreement on the direction of development in the broader destination, and just kind of the importance of that for long-term sustainability. And so I guess that's kind of another benefit specifically about the visitor economy that Main Streets may be able to take part in.
That's great, thank you. Could you review perhaps a couple of the main types of examples that you found in your research of BIAs partnering with different types of organizations to develop the visitor economy?
Yeah, so there was a lot of good examples that came out of the interviews. And I think, some BIAs talked about partnering with other Main Streets or similar organizations. And that's something David will talk about in our interview. He was talking about his initiative, and I thought it was like one of the coolest ideas. And so I'm excited to hear more from him about that. And then also some BIAs talked about partnering with DMOs and municipalities. And of course, Rebecca's example stood out from the interviews for that. And so I won't talk too much about those examples. I'll leave that up to them. But another example that came up was some Main Streets partnered a lot with visitor economy suppliers. And also, like, I guess that's kind of beneficial because obviously suppliers have direct access and communication with different visitor segments that potentially Main Streets could leverage. And so one example of that would be a BIA in Nova Scotia. It's Spring Garden BIA. They had been, prior to the pandemic, collaborating with a local tour operator. And so they had been trying to plan historic tours of the Main Street to kind of showcase the history of the area, but then also use that as a way to kind of draw traffic into the Main Street. And so I guess another thing that kind of came up in my reading was like the importance of partnerships being mutually beneficial. And so when thinking about like partnering with, for example, a tour operator, that obviously is beneficial for the Main Street because you're gaining access to a source of visitors that maybe you didn't have before. But then also thinking about the tour operator, they're benefiting because when you think about now, they're saying that through the pandemic and into the future, this idea of like more domestic or regional travel may become increasingly popular. And so now they're gaining access to a new tour to add to their portfolio that kind of highlights a local experience. And so it kind of has that benefit for them as well. Yeah, so those are, I guess, some of the examples that came up in the interviews. And I guess also I was talking with Tom last week, and the example of Airbnb came up as well. And so like potential around maybe Main Streets using Airbnb as another potential partner or a way to collaborate. And so, and it may not work for all BIAs, but maybe specifically those that don't necessarily have other forms of accommodation nearby. And so is there potential to work with, let's say, hosts and collaborating with them to draw visitors into the Main Street? And so Tom is mentioning there's like a website called Inside Airbnb. If anyone's interested in checking it out, I was looking at it over the weekend and it's pretty cool. You can go into specific neighborhoods and you can narrow in, and it actually will show you all of the hosts in your neighborhood. And you can actually click on individual hosts and it takes you to their posting on Airbnb. And so, is there potential to, now that you have information on who's hosting in your neighborhood, to maybe engage with those hosts and say, are you willing to, can I provide you with a welcome package for you to give to your guests? And in that welcome package, maybe including information on your main street or different experiences or coupons or whatever it is that you may want to have. And so obviously that helps the main street, you're getting information out there, but then with that idea of it being mutually beneficial, the host is also helping to improve the guest experience. It's nice when you go into an Airbnb and you've got kind of that information at your fingertips. It's kind of like a nice touch. So that option as well. And then just kind of also another thing about Airbnb is Tom was also telling me about, they have a thing called Airbnb experiences, where locals can, in a similar way, instead of listing their places for people to stay, like accommodations, you can list different experiences that you would offer. And so they have a lot of things on there, like they have like food tours or jewelry making or photography, all kinds of different things. And so maybe another idea to collaborate with locals and kind of help them to list experiences in this way as like a way to attract visitors to the main street. And I guess when Tom was talking to me about this, what was appealing and what I thought was interesting about it is it kind of allows visitors to experience the main street through a local's perspective. And I guess it kind of gives that added layer of like authenticity and uniqueness to the way that people are experiencing the main street. So I thought those were like a couple other good examples. Yeah, I feel like I'm talking too much, but yeah.
That's what you're here for. You're here to talk. Well done. Perhaps once we move to the next speaker, Natasha, I wonder if you would drop those links into the chat for people to explore the Inside Airbnb and the Airbnb experiences. That would be great.
Yeah.
The last question I wanted to ask you, Natasha, was, talking to BIAs, would you have any, having talked to 30 or 35 people now, do you have any tips on things that they should be looking at if they are considering starting or establishing a new partnership relating to the visitor economy? Any tips?
Yeah, so I guess tips, and I guess just to preface this with like, I'm not an expert, I'm a student, I like reading research, and this is just some stuff that I came across, but just a disclaimer that I'm not an expert in this, but I guess some tips I would say would be, I think the biggest thing is just being as intentional as possible and kind of planning before a partnership and not just kind of jumping into anything right off the bat. And so I guess just thinking about like the first thing is like, why do you want to form a partnership? Like, what is it that you're looking to gain from it? Is it like you want to work on data collection or visitor economy recovery or strategic planning? And then kind of like, in what capacities are you looking to partner? Like, are you looking for someone to cost share with or develop skills or share information? And then I guess like one of the other big things is like being critical about like, what is it that you have as an organization that would be of value to other people? And for, I guess, a lot of main streets, it could be things like you have experience hosting events, or you have relationships with businesses and local governments. And then kind of on the flip side of that is like, what are you looking for other organizations to bring to the partnership that you need? And so maybe it could be like you're looking for someone with further marketing reach or experience with destination development or access to particular visitor markets. And so kind of once you have a sense of these kind of big questions that can kind of guide you into a more effective partnership, I think it's kind of about how can you manage that partnership and make sure that it's actually working long-term. And so just doing things like setting clear objectives and talking about and kind of dividing labor and who's going to be responsible for what, and communicating regularly. And then like kind of what I talked about a bit earlier was the idea of like, it's important to make sure that it's mutually beneficial and that everybody involved is kind of getting something out of it. And because, if in terms of the long-term sustainability, it's not necessarily the best if like there's just one organization that's kind of helping all the others along. So it should kind of help everyone. And then I guess the last thing is just kind of making sure that you're kind of evaluating the partnership as you go through. So are you actually meeting the objectives that you set out in the beginning? And if not, what can you do to kind of change things to make sure that progress is being made? So yeah.
That's great. That's a really good, succinct summary of quite a lot of ideas and information. So that's a really good kind of basis to build upon. Thank you, Natasha. That's great. David, I'm going to move to you. How are you? Welcome.
I'm doing well, thank you.
So, thanks so much for being part of the session. And I know when Natasha was doing her research, she, found your example of the bike loop, and that kind of really spoke to us. But I guess, first of all, would you just briefly introduce who you are and perhaps the main street that you represent?
Sure. Yeah, I'm with the Exchange District Business Improvement Zone. Winnipeg decided to get cutesy with its acronym for these organizations. We've existed since 1989, so we've been around for quite a while. We within our zone, the reason for the name of it is we also encompass Parks Canada designated National Historic Site. So the Exchange District is it's got about 120 designated historic buildings within about a 10-minute walk of each other. So from one side to the next. So it's a very unique place. We're very familiar with destination marketing. It really is a big chunk of what we do. I think that more or less sums it up.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And so, the specific example we were interested in is the bike loop. Mm-hmm. And so I guess perhaps, start at the beginning, like perhaps what is the bike loop and what was the kind of motivation to get that started in the first place?
Yeah, there are a couple. It was accelerated, I think, by the pandemic and by the trend of so many people getting on their bikes, and sort of combined with some conversations I'd had with my colleague Joe Cornelson at the West End Biz, which is just next to us, about how central Winnipeg is pretty easy to traverse on a bike, and it's not that intimidating, but it's not always clear how to do it. I think a lot of major cities have this issue. The infrastructure might be there. In some places it's incomplete, but you can get around it, no problem. But if you don't know how or where, that can be complicated. So between those two different conversations, and then of course with the pandemic, we started talking about how could we create something that would encourage that kind of local tourism within the city, because nobody's traveling anywhere. And how can we capitalize on the fact that all the bike shops are out of bikes? So we decided to cobble together this loop that really goes through 6 different BIAs. It's probably maybe eight or 10 neighborhoods, and certainly right up next to one other one. So the idea was most people can probably find their way. If you're thinking about the low-hanging fruit, people on their bikes, they're willing to travel a certain amount of distance. So there would be about, I would say, 300,000 people or so within a 5-minute bike ride of accessing the loop. So the concept was to get people to the loop, to create a loop that was very gentle for people to use and easy to traverse. And that would, it's not that people are intended to stay on the loop or to go around the whole thing, but that if you access the loop, then you have access to some self-exploration. And that's really what it was about. It was about creating that framework.
Right. And then, so tell me about the actual partnership then. Is it a formal partnership? Is there some kind of like written agreement about how things are going to play out? Or did it kind of come together more casually, I guess? And what is the partnership that you have with the other BIAs?
It's definitely more casual. Right. It's sort of a collaborative effort. So I would say that Joe and I put together the basic framework. Then we reached out to the downtown Winnipeg Biz and the others and sort of said, hey, is this something that you'd be interested in working together to promote and collaborate on? Again, the idea being that each biz would be able to take advantage of it in their own way. So much like one of my members told me when I first started in this role, one of my retailers who said to me, your job is to get people into the neighborhood. It's the job of the individual business to get them in the door. And that was kind of how we approached this as well. This was to show people that they could get around through all of these really interesting areas on bike very easily. It's about a 40-minute loop going at a very casual pace. And yet nobody would guess that it's that quick to get through these neighborhoods. Just in your mind, it all seems a lot further. So then the idea then is for each BIA to take advantage of that infrastructure.
Got you. And how did it work? Like, was it success? Did you see lots of people using it? Is it still going?
It was a great success in the first year. This last year was maybe a little more successful in terms of usage from what we were able to gather. It didn't get as much attention, and people didn't talk about it as much. We do have some plans to try to enhance it. We got started a little bit later this year, I would say, is one of the downfalls. And partly we were waiting on, there were some potential bits of funding that were coming through that didn't. And we probably should have had a plan B earlier. I'll put it that way. So ideally, we'd like to continue to enhance the route. We'd like to work in partnership with the municipality to take the portions that are not official routes and make them a little bit more official, and just find ways to keep enhancing it.
Okay. And so have you been able to either anecdotally or more substantially kind of measure the impact of what the bike loop has brought to the community and neighboring BIAs?
It'd definitely be more anecdotal, where people would be using the loop or stumbling on the loop, because we put pretty good signage all along the route, and talking about how they had no idea that they could get to all these neighborhoods in 40 minutes, or they would say, I didn't know this park was here. Right. And it's 10 minutes from my house. It's those kinds of things that I think people are really starting to explore. This year we did also try something out with the West End Biz in terms of doing a joint bike tour. So our area it's just too compact for a bike tour to ever make sense. Once you're here, everything's, you'd be getting on and off your bike more than you'd actually be riding it. So, and the West End, they've got a little bit more direction, but the idea of having a tour that went across both zones made a lot more sense. So what we're hoping for is that there'll be more of those kinds of partnerships struck with adjacent BIAs and different kinds of programs and things. So I would say we're kind of base layer with it at this point, and it's all a matter of what we do with it from here.
And I mean, that's an interesting question. I mean, is this the first kind of partnership of the kind that you've with the other BIAs? Like, was this kind of inspired because of COVID? It's like the first time we got to do something together to figure something out, or has there been a history of partnerships and this is just another example of that?
In the past, our partnerships, I would say, have been more around advocacy issues. On occasion, a partnership might look like one of us is going to lead something or do something and ask the others to participate in it. But again, they tend to be advocacy and awareness type partnerships. The Exchange District has so many partnerships, as you can imagine, because of the nature of where we are with our National Historic Site. We, of course, partner with National Trust on things all the time. We partner with Destination Winnipeg, which I'm pretty sure every major city in the country has a similar type of organization. We do lots of partnerships. It's the only way we can really do a lot of this stuff. But to partner with the other BIAs, I think this was also a bit of a test of that, to be honest. I think a few of us, downtown and West End and myself for sure, have been talking about what kinds of things could we partner on that aren't going to be like my initiative or your initiative, but something that we can all work on together and benefit from equally. So it was very carefully designed to do that. So doesn't look like it's being run by any one of us, and everyone will get out of it what they put into it.
Right. And has it led to further collaboration and further discussion of new partnerships on new projects and new ideas, or is it kind of it's served its purpose? And
I think there's more openness to those kinds of collaborations. I think we've shown that this can work, and now it's a question of how to make some of the other things work. It's always complicated. I mean, one of the things with BIAs collaborating with each other, particularly within the same city, I mean, there's a lot of national collaboration with BIAs and international collaboration, but again, they tend to be advocacy oriented or data or research oriented. One of the challenges is, of course, we're responsible for a specific geography. So, I'm interested, and my job is, I may be interested in promoting everybody's business across the city, but my job is to promote the businesses within my zone, and as it is for, all of my neighbors. So finding ways that we can all do that isn't competitive is the challenge. So something like this works. And it's kind of, we're tossing around some ideas for some other things that might work as well. Those tours are a good example of that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, the idea that visitors don't always see the destination as, a boundary between this intersection and that, right? Like, you go to downtown Winnipeg or you go to downtown Toronto, whatever it is, and you, as a visitor, you just kind of like wander around and you cross kind of borders without really thinking about it. And it's
practically nobody cares about that except for
right,
except for the organizations themselves and the members, frankly, too, because
yeah. No, I mean, one of my first tourism memories of Canada, I used to work in the visitor center in Toronto, and the amount of people that would come in and say, I'm on a road trip, can you give me information for Montreal? I'm going to Montreal. And of course it's like, no, like we don't do that. That's we're not going to give you information to our competitors. But it meant that people were leaving feeling frustrated and not being served with the information that they wanted. And so thinking about visitors as not just in your block or whatever it is, but how do you fit into their overall experience, and serving that is a really useful, interesting point. And so forgive me. So within the bike loop, then do you have signage? Is it signage and maps? Is that more or less the
yeah, it's mostly branding and signage and maps. That's the extent of the kind of shared infrastructure and promotion, right? So we've been promoting it and things. The next level is to make the infrastructure better and to find some additional ways to activate it. It's not quite a build it and they will come, but we've built it. We've started to test some different ways of thinking about it, and I think the next is to do a little bit more of that. I would say that within I mean, this isn't really partnership related, but it would relate to what our intent is with the loop. Within my own boundaries within the Exchange District biz, we don't do a lot of events ourselves. When we do, though, the intent is to demonstrate to other people, hey, here's somewhere that you may not have thought of that you could do an interesting little event. So we'll activate spaces more as it's almost more like advertising to other potential partners. So that's where I would see this going with the loop as well, is of course each BIA can do their own thing, but I think we'd like to find ways to get others to start using it in their own ways. So I think there's plenty of opportunity for that.
That's great, thank you. And so the last question I have for you right now is, do you have any broad general tips for other BIAs, other main streets thinking about doing something similar? If you were to give some advice to people, do you have any general advice?
Yeah, I mean, I think keep it as open as possible, but also keep it as defined as possible at the same time. That may sound contradictory, but creating these kind of framework type pieces is what can really work with BIAs partnering with one another. Somebody's going to have to take the lead on one thing or another, and we certainly saw that with this. Each BIA, most of them took a lead on some piece of it. And keep that collaboration, keep that communication going, and make sure that it's beneficial for everybody. That's really the key. The more broad based, the easier it'll be to get done. And
that's great. Thank you. So Rebecca is having internet issues, so she's getting kicked on and off the call. But I mean, this could be a great time to take some questions for Natasha and David. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to type into the chat, raise your hand and come off mute. If you guys have any questions, very happy to take them. Natasha, did you come across many other examples of BIAs working together in your research? Or was that a common thing that you found?
Not a ton, but there were some. Like there was some examples, maybe not as visitor economy focused as David's example, but like there was one where two nearby BIAs kind of worked together on a holiday event, and so where they said like prior to COVID they hadn't really worked together before. And so I think there were some examples definitely of them together, but it wasn't like the main thing that I heard. So I think David's was definitely one of the most interesting.
Yeah, there's a I remember reading about in the tourism literature, the term called a CoOpetition. It's a bit of a cheesy term, but it's this idea, it relates to what you were saying, David, of, people don't necessarily choose to come to the Hilton Hotel in Toronto. They choose to come to Toronto. And so for the Hilton Hotel, they might be competing with the hotel next door for business, but ultimately they want people to choose Toronto first, right? So you've got to help people choose that bigger destination first. And then once they get there, then you can fight over the business once they've chosen to come to that particular place. And so working with partners that might be competitors is a really useful approach, I think.
There's a very long-standing pub here in the Exchange called the King's Head. And when I first joined in this role, and I met with the owner, and he was talking about how, there were a bunch of breweries and other bars and things starting to open up. For a long time, he was kind of the main staple. And if, people asked him if he was worried about that or nervous about that, and he said, no, the more the merrier. He said, I know that only, a certain number of people are going to come to my pub every single day. He said, but if I can get them down to here every single day, then the people that are regulars somewhere else will check mine out sometimes, and mine will check theirs out sometimes. And that's just better. So I think I think some business owners get that, and some leaders get that, and then others really get nervous about competition. But everyone can sort of carve out their space and grow the pie, I think.
Absolutely. And I think it's true also then for BIAs, perhaps BIAs in a city where there are neighboring BIAs. It's not that your next door BIA is a competitor all the time, right? They also need to, if they go to the next door and have a good experience, then they might come back next time and come to your BIA next time and have they'll come back. So that's good too. Great. Thanks, David. Appreciate it. Rebecca, how are you? You're still on mute. There we go. Are you there? You've had one of those frustrating, there we go. Frustrating experience with coming on and off the internet. There we go. Let me see if I can. There we go. There we go.
I am having I lost my internet and I've got back on with hotspot, but now I'm stuck in my slideshow because the laptop I'm on is not functioning very well. So I can.
Would you like me to, I've got your slides. Would you like me to skip through them for you?
That would be wonderful.
No problem. Give me just half a minute. Let's get these up and running. So yeah, Rebecca, we've just heard from David about his partnership with other BIAs. I guess your situation is somewhat different because you can tell me that if I'm wrong, but I don't think there are many BIAs around you, right? You're the only BIA kind of in Stratford.
Thank you for doing that for me. Yes. So we're a population of 32,000 and growing. With rural development, there's a lot of people moving here. And I think because of the age of COVID, a lot of people are looking to move out of the GTA. So we've seen an influx of people moving here. Stratford, as I said, is a smaller population, but really rich in their Main Street offerings because we typically have world-class theater here every year. The Stratford Festival is known internationally. And with that comes, as an anchor to our economy, we have a beautiful culinary school here. So we have great restaurants and offerings for the visitor and the local alike. I was a tourist here in 2013 and moved here in 2014 from BC. I grew up in Toronto, but there was something about Stratford, and who would think that here I am now as the GM of the BIA? That's just weird. But anyway, so there you have Ontario Street. But if we go to the next slide, please. Thanks so much. I can't believe that I lost my internet. I'm like, troubleshooting. You're your own IT person when you work from home. Anyway, so, the Stratford BIA has had strong relationships with our municipality, but more so with our DMO and RTO, our RTO 4, but kind of at arm's length. So in the last 6 years, we've offered a grant to groups that do events or animations or potentially want to do hygiene or beautification projects through what we call the Destination Animation Project. And so we pool in money to try to lift others up to do their own projects, because we're a small engine. And as Natasha was saying, it's sometimes great to build those partnerships and relationships with groups that are doing great things but need a little extra help. So that's kind of how our relationship had started with our DMO. Again, not a lot of interaction before the age of COVID, but we would meet on this and be a jury and animate other groups to do great things. So we can go to the next slide. So these are just some of the examples. So, you know, theater, outdoor movies, beautification projects, puppet festivals, summer music is something we do every year, draws in a lot of people. And so we're kind of silent partners in this, but we're trying to, you know, identify what's going to animate and create a better environment and draw on tourism, and of course, you know, things that will attract people to stay maybe for more than the day. And also we build around the Stratford Festival, so we're mindful of when these happenings and animations are happening. We're trying to ensure that we're building other things and other experiences for the visitor. So we can go to the next slide. So again, my focus has been COVID only because I took on the role of GM in late 2019, where I was thinking of really exciting things like transit and parking, and you're meeting with your municipality. However, you know, just as I was getting my footing, there had been no one in this role either. So they were working as a board with some support staff. So, you know, when March of 2020 hit, I actually, from best practice calls that we have with Ontario BIA, which have been extremely helpful, learned that Peterborough had developed a economic response and recovery task force, or something along the same vein as what we've developed. And I brought that to our mayor and the head of our ECDev, who kind of said immediately, we're too small for that kind of thing. No, you know. But within a few weeks, our ED at our Invest Stratford pulled together you know, leaders in many facets, whether they be not-for-profit, social, work-based, agriculture, like you name it. But her focus with us was on the hospitality, retail, and tourism side of things. So the executive director at the time was put into a co-chair position, my DMO, which is Destination Stratford, and us to take a grant that we had got from FedUp and decide what we were going to use, how we were going to use it for response and recovery. So we worked with the city and Invest Stratford to develop a community forum to get feedback from the community and groups of interest that would like to do things. And of course, it was a challenge to work through because things were changing so quickly at that time, but we worked together in a fair manner where each idea got put through a process of a jury, and we all spoke to what if we thought they were good ones or not. And then there were some larger chunks of money that were spent towards projects that Destination Stratford and the BIA worked together to implement. And we wouldn't have been able to do that without the city of Stratford kind of massaging out bylaws and bending rules through the pandemic to ensure that we could make the most of our local tourism, hyper local tourism, and tap into people in our close in our surrounding areas, because quite frankly, that's all we could do. So, so next slide, please. Okay, so some of the initiatives that we work closely with our DMO on, and bearing in mind, we didn't have a working relationship before, we may both be called to the table to give input to the municipality on, like I said, parking, transit, things that are fun like that. But we just got really creative. We decided to do these yoga circles in the park system. So we had to work with the Parks Board to get permission on that. They'd never allowed commerce before in the park system, but they waived that for last year and this year, because a couple of yoga studios who were charging for classes did their classes outdoors. Our city approved extended boardwalks for which we called our alfresco program. So hospitality restaurants did the extended patios. And then we also at cost purchased 50 tables for public spaces, Market Square, Tom Patterson Island, which is just different, a stone's throw from downtown. We had the city work with us on getting our liquor license extended to these public spaces. So then the first year they said liquor with food, but only in Market Square between this time and that time. And then they got super European. And the next year they said, okay, you can also do this in the park system with your with your picnic. And of course, we're marketing all of these things. And as Natasha stated, these partnerships. So your tourism operators that are offering, the liquor with food are also promoting that. We did a really great project called I See Gold, which was a video, and it documented all of our efforts and all of the community stakeholders that were involved. And I can't even list them all, between doing things at cost, like the furniture was at cost, and we had, engineers coming and putting together the tables for free. And it was just like a very big collective community effort to bridge this time. And then we also partnered with, and there'll be some slides coming up with, as a sponsor, huge chunk of our budget went to Lights on Stratford, which is a new lights festival, started last year, and we're moving into the next season this year. We also worked on the STAT grant, which was providing grants for through Invest Stratford, but we were on the jury and worked with communication with our members to tap into FedDev funds for transforming and accelerating your business through COVID. So everything from, facility infrastructure pieces to your business, or digital marketing things, getting your shop up on the website, whatever you need to do. And then we also were the jury on these animation projects through the Destination Animation Project and other FedDev funded projects. And we got our next slide. So glad that I could be here. I didn't think I was going to make it back. So these are some lovely visuals of our alfresco program. Supply issues with wood. We ran out of wood. We couldn't get our umbrellas they were supposed to, it's just everything you could think of went wrong, but it all worked out. And we have this beautiful space in Market Square where we provided a space for people to bring takeout. But I think it's something that's going to stay. And we are working with our city to ensure that that program is indefinite, including the boardwalk program. And we can go to the next slide. So Lights on Stratford, again, we are not the heavy lifters here, but we have sponsored and we work with our businesses and did in terms of other elements. So there were grants available through RTO for businesses to light up their windows and do their own installations. So RTO was a partner. Digital Main Street also helped us get a bunch of projectors so we could do projection mapping and windows to just light up retail displays. And we engaged local artists and technicians that are otherwise out of work with the festival to ensure that we were supporting our local economy by engaging those people in those special areas so that they could help us develop this program. So our DMO is the project manager, but we have been heavy in the sponsorship lifting and the promotion lifting of this as well. And it's next. Next slide, please. And then again, would emerge through these community partnerships. And again, our DMO and our BI would work together to, lift up and leverage these other groups. So, we saw everything from movies and parking lots to the light festival you can see there on our city hall. So the city was a partner in that and said, yes, you can light up our city hall, which is pretty cool. Outdoor music out of trucks that could drive away if they needed to because everything was mobile, as well as this barge that usually sits, static, but it moved up and down our river. So everyone kind of worked together and we saw all of these animations kind of come out this year as well with lesser restrictions, which was really cool to see. And then next.
Unfortunately, this is the slide that didn't show up, but it was the slide that had spread the word support for small business sales. Downtown dollars increased 766%.
Right. So that's just, we have downtown dollars. And so, which are our city gift certificate. And because of our ECDEV in Stratford, mainly communicating with our manufacturing partners, agriculture partners, and businesses that are otherwise outside of our BIA to encourage them to buy those downtown dollars for staff. Really, there wasn't a substantial increase for, the walk-in person who was just buying it for a small gift. But we had, manufacturing companies buying these in the, tens of thousands for staff. And we then almost had an 800% increase, I believe, or from the year before. And we are seeing that again this year. I don't have the final numbers, but there's still that support, which then, comes and the money is then spent in the economy past Christmas in what would be our shoulder season. Even without the festival, it's a quieter time. So really nice to see again that community support from, outside partners, including, and that was the encouragement of, our DMO and our economic development. So you're missing pictures of happy faces of business owners holding those downtown dollars. That slide, but oh well. Okay.
We trust you.
And then the next slide, please. Okay, so continued collaboration. While we've all kind of retreated back into our own individual groups because we're not in crisis mode, so it seems, it's a little bit more strategic where we're looking at projects that we want to work on together. Again, the rising, the coming together, as Natasha talked about in terms of whether you're, leveraging labor, marketing, or budget or skill set, we have found that this worked really well through COVID. So why not continue with this? And just, it's better for the community. It's better for our culture. It's better to align some of our objectives together. So one thing we are doing is EDI training, and that will be done. And a great example of best practice calls, and something like we're doing today where we learn what others are doing. We learned of this facilitator through our Ontario BIA calls that Burlington had worked with this facilitator and Mending the Chisholm, and amazing work was done. So we reached out to them, and now we're working with Lena there and her team. So that will be with our municipalities working on their own plans. They had said they need to clean out house before they start extending to others. But because we had developed this great working relationship with our DMO and our economic development, we've decided to also extend this to our library. But we're all working together on our board staff portion of this, and then we will move on to open this up to small, medium business in our boundaries outside of them. And we also will, stack our budgets, and we have applied for funding that we received through RTO for this. There's a lot of projects that have been applied for, and I just saw in my inbox I got approval for my activator grant with my Main Street, which is really exciting. But there's a lot of strategic co-application letters of support when we're applying for grants. We're working on, Ontario by Bike certification for our downtown, and we're looking at, projects and grants that will support that infrastructure. Another thing that the DMO and the BIA are working on is, as you can see, we're the public art piece. So there's an organization called STEPS. Is very helpful in helping you create cultural and public art policy, which we do not have in place. And we've learned through trying to achieve public art that that's not easy to do when you don't have that in place. So that's a goal for next year, and our DMO will be partnering on that. And I did mention cycle tourism, which DMO and regional tourism had already worked on. They created some mapping for Perth, St. Mary's, and Stratford. So there's some in-town mapping, and there's some regional mapping, and the G2G. And so there is a heavy focus on cycle tourism. And I think I missed all of what David said, but I would imagine that a lot of that came out of the fact that we were doing things outside. We were promoting activities that we could do outside and focusing on hyperlocal and regional tourism. So we see a benefit to that for both the environment and also an economic driver. And so we're putting our focus on that for the coming this year and into next year. One other thing that's not on here that we are working on together, the DMO and myself, I used to work in film and television, and we see that, making a city film friendly is a very good economic driver as well. So that's kind of on the spectrum of things we're looking at. But I sit on a committee called SOFA, which is Southwestern Film Alliance, and we've been working with them to see what we can do to, film offices are grand, but you do need money for the role and the position. But that is on the list of things to do. And then next slide. So this is Lights on Stratford. Will be starting December 17th in our Market Square, where you saw all those tables. You're going to see this installation that's interactive with music, and it's in a big, wacky, inflatable, fun thing. So as well as many other installations, and again, grants open to businesses to apply so that they can do their own light installations. But also, I think our BIA role in this is that we have sponsored this installation, but also how are we engaging with our members to ensure we're leveraging this time. So winter is not a time in which people usually visit Stratford. They come for the festival and then it's very quiet here. But one of the long-term goals that we came out of our research for response and recovery was developing something in the winter. And you see that in a lot of cities, like developing a winter season when you wouldn't otherwise. So this is our attempt. And I think it's going to take some, businesses are tired and they like to take a little break at this time after Christmas, but massaging out those relationships and supporting those businesses to create experiences for the tourist when they come here. So, working on things like a light fare and a special menu and marketing all these things and making it really, even if it's only, out of our, 68 hospitality businesses, if 10 or 15 engage in programming, we can add that to our marketing. And so, so working on that. So we're hopeful. Last year, this got, we had a lockdown when this was a month in because we started earlier in the year. We started in November. However, we're hopeful that this year will be a success and we'll see that tourism development and locals alike come out and enjoy the happenings in and around town. Because it's not just this, we have other installations in our Stratford Festival. I believe they're doing an installation in the theater again. So there's things peppered all through the city that are engaging and inviting. So next slide. This is my last slide. So if you're going to ask me a question about tips, I think it's just a rising tide lifts all boats and hope floats, because this is one of our lights on installations lit up at night. Again, I was new in the role shortly before COVID, but I'm big on collaboration. I love connecting. And I think that as Natasha had stated in her discovery and talking to several BIAs, you have so much more impact in a community if you are working together and you do develop those relationships and you can identify your strengths and work together towards achieving your objectives.
Great, thank you, Rebecca. That was wonderful. I do have some questions, but I'm going to also open it up to the everybody on the call. So please, if this is a chance. I know we've got a few BIAs on the call. We've also got a couple of tourism industry suppliers. We've got a couple of people from different businesses that serve tourists and visitors. But this would be a great chance to hear questions or your own experiences of either working in partnerships relating to Main Streets and BIA. So please feel free to type into the chat or raise your hand and ask our speakers some questions or share some experiences that you've had. One question I have for kind of all of you is, I've seen through being part of this project, a bit of a trend or a kind of story that I've seen is, that COVID happens and kind of creates this need for partnerships. Like we kind of, as a Main Street community, we're now relying upon each other way more than we used to, and we've got to connect with the BIA. I think Natasha found that engagement from members to the BIA was kind of increased a lot soon after COVID, and also with local governments of changing permits and allowing for drinks outside and all that kind of stuff, right? That perhaps had taken years and meetings to kind of get to. And so I guess in some ways, COVID kind of created the situation where partnerships were much easier to form and kind of required to form. And I guess, do you see those partnerships maintaining and being sustained as we kind of start to move out of the major impacts of COVID? And are you doing things to kind of maintain those and sustain those partnerships ongoing? I guess to Rebecca and David.
Sure. Dave, I can say that I have seen some waning, and it takes work, right? So initially, it was by need, and there was the surprise that, when you break down silos, you're much more effective. But I think as our organizations have moved into, what were we going to do the year before? What were our objectives? Our engines are only so big, our workforce is only so large in both our VMO and our BIA. So there is a balance of trying to achieve our own organizational goals, but keeping that open. So, when I showed you the things we've agreed to work on together. And it does take, we're not having as many meetings, stakeholder meetings. Our task force has kind of devolved with the agreement that we'll work together, and we have continued to do so. But it would be a shame to lose all of that, because I think it is super effective, but it does take work. I'm often, getting wind of, maybe my DMO is working on something and I'll be like, we're also over here. So why don't we, there's like a lot of like corralling and trying to, bring people together, because everyone's kind of still, I think everyone's working. There hasn't seemed to be a big break, right? I don't know if David can relate. You have some honeymoon periods where you see your projects come into effect and you're like, great. But we've all been kind of on super high alert for what's next. What happens when the wage subsidy is taken away, and what happens when how is that going to impact our businesses, and how can we support? So I've seen it when
it has been relentless, and for us to like a lot of major city downtowns, a lot of our ground floor businesses rely on office workers, and that's still not back at full strength. So for us, in particular, because we are a bit of a tourism destination, and so in the summer we've got a number of festivals, and in the darker winter months, we've got the concert hall here, so the WSO and the Manitoba Opera and the Manitoba Theatre Centre, they're all operating. So we've had this double whammy. So normally when it's slow with office workers, it's compensated by tourists and visitors, whether local or further afield, and concerts and whatnot. But both were gone through the pandemic, right? So there wasn't that compensation that normally happens, where one is kind of overlaps. And yeah, so we're not quite out of the woods in terms of regular, visitation. But a lot of those supports are vanishing. So yeah, it's been exhausting. And some of the things, even some of the innovative ideas that we had during the pandemic that just now are not going to work, right? But we're not quite in a place to do the usual stuff, right? It's a very odd tentative space that we're in right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Interesting. I don't want to put people on the spot in there, but I do know that there are people on the call from city bus tours and from a concert company. I was just curious if, from a supplier's viewpoint, have you guys worked with BIAs? Would you be willing to kind of share any experiences or ideas, or do you, from what you're hearing, is there a way to as a supplier serving tourists, do you see ways that would make it simpler and appealing to work with BIAs? Aoife, how are you?
How are you? Good.
Nice to hear you.
Likewise. We're part of the waterfront BIA, the harbourfront. And yeah, we've certainly worked with that BIA. I mean, we're kind of all over the place. We consider ourselves as part of many BIAs, but that's kind of our official one. And we've worked with them in a number of different ways. I guess one of the ones that springs to mind is the waterfront had a discount card for locals that kind of spanned across coffee shops, pharmacies, tours. So we definitely took part in that. We've advertised with them and them with us and things, but partnerships, I think, in general are increasingly important. And for sure, when you were saying about the bar where he was like, yeah, once more people are coming down here. I mean, you're familiar with the Toronto Attractions Council, and and we should all be competitors. We're all competing with each other for tourist time and dollars, but we work together collaboratively, regularly, and come together on things like advertising and stuff that maybe as individuals we wouldn't be able to fit into our budget, especially these days. So yeah, so it's an important thing.
Great. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Does anyone else have any questions or comments for the speakers or relating to the topic? I mean, something that I was, yeah, please, Rebecca.
I was going to, speaking to what David said about the office people disappearing, We have professional services downtown, and we identified that a lot of them didn't shop downtown prior to whatever BC, before COVID. And so we started something just around the holiday, but I love the idea of a local card, but it was called Festive Fridays. It's an internal discount that, we allowed any business to offer something, a discount of their choice. And then we would promote that internally to all of our BIA members so that they would get out there and shop, right? So every Friday you can get out as a staff, of any of our members, but we really did target accounting firms that had a large number of employees and things like that. So that just came to mind that is helpful. And I've never seen so many coffee shops, ice cream and pizza pop up since all of this, but right. I'm just thinking about the competition's sake. It's like you think, oh, there's another pizza place, but they all seem to be doing quite well. So, and I think Stratford is very supportive in that way too. There isn't a huge competitive flavor. We did a video project too, where the DMOs usually get influencers to come in, right? And all their things, where we made our businesses our influencers. So I just did a video series with 6 of our businesses. I was very specific to different Main Street, different type of business. And we love this term, rip off and duplicate, but I copied Vogue 73. So you go in and it's point of view and you rapid fire them questions, but their focus is partially on their own business, but mainly where do they go to do XYZ? Like where do you get your hair cut? Where do you go to eat? Where's your favorite place? And so it's just this like love local community spirit where the business owners themselves are now the influencers and sharing with the community where they like to go and where they frequent. So just thinking that's another way to kind of squash the competition in a way, right? Like another place you can squash the mentality of competitiveness and support.
Yeah, no, that must be a bit of a challenge, I guess, sometimes to communicate to some members that's a good approach to take. Yeah, good. A question, perhaps you both covered it in bits, and it kind of came up through Natasha's research as well. And Natasha, please chime in if I'm misrepresenting what you found, but is the relationship with destination marketing organizations. Perhaps I'll summarize what I understand that broadly to be for the BIA community, and I don't want to kind of call out specific people, but is that occasionally there was some kind of frustration between BIAs and DMOs about, especially pre-COVID, about what that relationship could be, and what BIAs could offer DMOs in terms of, giving them interesting, diverse experiences to have, especially in the larger cities where there are perhaps secondary destinations off the beaten path type places. However, since COVID happened and DMOs are now looking very, locally, that those relationships have become stronger and more aligned. The interests have become more aligned. I guess to the speakers on the call, but also anyone on the call at all. Have you seen those relationships with DMOs? Because DMOs seem like a very obvious partner to have with the visitor economy. Have you seen those relationships kind of strengthen and evolve in a positive way, in a sustaining way? Do you have any tips or ideas of how to sell a BIA? For a BIA to say, "Hey, DMO, you should partner with us because,"
I would say, we might be in a bit of a unique position in the Exchange District because we're a National Historic Site. We've always had a very good relationship with Tourism Winnipeg, and just frankly, we're one of the most picturesque parts of the downtown. So they're always keen to come and take pictures and find out where they should go and where they should direct people. We've had a pretty good relationship with them over the years. So yeah, that hasn't been that big of an issue for us. But like I said, we're a bit unique that way.
Please, Rebecca.
I would say again. So again, I was new to the role at late 2019, and we actually share office space with our DMO. Slightly. They kind of offer us a couple cubicles, but the person who was in leadership prior to summer 2020. Great person, but not a big collaborator, not really involved in the community. And we then had assigned in one of these working groups for destination development for our task force recovery group, someone who we had worked closely with RTO4, who was now in a consulting role. But anyway, he was at the helm of that group as we worked through all of those projects and really proved himself. And when that role became available, he flipped right into it perfectly. And that was just, we had already worked so closely together that relationship is now developed. It was lucky. So it's really about who you have in the role too and what their vision is. I mean, prior again to March 2020, I was told that we are to market to the 5-kilometer radius and they do everything else, right? That's our job. We just focus on downtown, right. Their job, but there wasn't any communicating about what that looked like. And it was very disjointed. And I think it's a lot more cohesive now. And also another thing, if you're going to approach your DMO, if you don't have that close relationship, you also have that member access. So we did a lot of surveying and getting information and pulling that resource for them and for ACTEV, who wouldn't otherwise have that information. So we can be used in a tool in that way to gather information from members who make up, again, I think as David's saying, like the downtown is the picturesque part. And our DMO was member-based as well. They got rid of that when the new leadership came in, which I think was an excellent idea because there's a lot of haves and have-nots. There's no way around that with a BIA. Your catchment, your area based on tax levy. But with the DMO, they lifted that membership and now they're not excluding anyone. So it's just a better model, I think.
Yeah, actually, you raise a good point too, because I would say that they're always looking for content, right? So in some ways, being self-serving and going to your DMO with content is actually good for them too. And they'll sometimes have the resources, like you said, they have the influencers, keeping them up to date on new developments in the area and, interesting things that they might want to take a look at or write about or promote. You're helping them do their job just as much. So it's not, I don't think it needs to be necessarily difficult in terms of partnership. You may not be, doing joint initiatives or things, but I think, their job is to promote your city or your area, and yours is, smaller scope, but they're always looking. They're content mills. They're looking for content all the time. So, like you said, giving them connection and access to members and to stories and to things that are going on, it just helps them.
Yeah, I agree. And, our best investment in 2020 was we didn't have a social media person. So now we have almost, a full-time social media person who was already tapped into many of the businesses downtown. And our DMO's social media coordinator and ours, they meet regularly. They have, they meet to discuss, joint initiatives and otherwise, right? So, or if we're going to be about to launch a video, like we want them to know so that they can share it, right? We want, they might miss that tag or whatever, but yeah, I think it's just, and as Natasha said, mutually beneficial. It's a good idea to try and develop those relationships.
That's great. Natasha, did you have anything to add or to ask to that?
Yeah, I guess kind of to add to David's point, and one of the examples that came up in the interviews was there was a BIA who for a decade was trying to partner with their DMO and they kind of just brushed them off, like, who's this little BIA, what are they going to do for me? And so she kind of just said, like, she sat down and put together like a bunch of resources. She had her end of year reports for the last however many years. She had some data collection that they had done, her strategic plan, and she just went to them and said, like, listen, this is who we are. This is why we're valuable to partner with. Would you consider giving this information? And then they kind of were more receptive, and now they actually partner on a bunch of different projects. So I guess just kind of really focusing on what you can bring to them and making that really clear, and then maybe they'll be more open to listening.
Oh, good point. I mean, Judy's just posted about Tourism Toronto, the DMO in Toronto, with their hidden gems, which is particularly true since COVID and the local kind of factor. But I remember my own time at Destination Toronto a few years ago now. But press trips was huge, right? And if there was something special about a particular neighborhood, it might be the best, pool hall in the city, right? And it might not be in downtown, but if there was a press trip that was connected to people that might like this particular activity, it was a great way to kind of push people to away from the kind of iconic tourism attractions into the different places. So there is potential to find those experiences. It's great. Does anyone have any questions or comments for the speakers today? I think we're going to wrap it up in a couple of minutes. Or if the speakers have any last comments or points they would like to make. I mean, the relationships there was really, partnerships don't have to be formal contract, MOU stuff, right? It's just building that relationships as well and making sure people are on the right page, the same page. All right, well, I think I'll wrap it up there, but I just want to say, thank you to Natasha, David, and Rebecca. Really appreciated your time and your insights, and taking an hour or so out of your busy schedules to share that information with us. So thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks.
To everyone on the call, there's our newsletter for the Main Street Reimagined project. We're going to start up again in January. We've got a few more sessions lined up. So if you want to stay tuned and hear what we're doing, please sign up for that. Otherwise, have a lovely winter break, whatever you celebrate, whatever you hope to do. I hope you get to do it and have get a chance to relax. And I know it's been a crazy year for people on the call. So good luck with everything, and we'll see you in the new year. Here's to 2022.
Here's to 2022.
Here's to 2022.
And thanks, Tom, for seeing me through my technical issues. So, but
no problem. Anytime. Good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Bye.
Bye, Isaac. Thanks, Isaac.